Hello, dear sisters. We are on week 30 of our studies together. And again, it's a milestone, so I wanted to summarize our previous 10 weeks of our studies. And you know that each 10 weeks, I always bring you a message that summarizes what we have just studied about, so we can refresh it in our minds. So I will start with week 20. But before I start, let me introduce a little creature that is to blame for the fact that I didn't come out online last week. So obviously I'm not to blame, but this guy is to blame right here. This guy right here, he's to blame. So he's to blame for the fact that I just got a little pet. So he's to blame for the fact that I didn't come out online. Okay, we will start with week 20. And in week 20, we talked about doing good to our husbands. And specifically, I was focusing on the fact of the consistency, that is the most important principle in doing good. We should be consistent, not just doing good to our husbands when we feel it, or like doing it, or not feel it like doing it, but doing good to our husbands on consistent basis. Dog is chewing on a cord. Sorry, need to get it out of his mouth. So we also talked about being useful to our husbands and how important it is to make sure that on daily basis we are useful to them and doing what they require of us to do. And I presented before you some specific ways of how you can be useful to your husband. In week 21, we talked about efficient money management. And as you remember, I mentioned that us being efficient money managers actually gives our husbands a peace of mind. It helps them to safely trust in us because they know that we will not just waste the family's hard-earned resources, and we will be able to store them up in heaven instead of just wasting them on materialistic pursuits. So being efficient money managers builds our husband's confidence in us. I presented before you several practical ways how we can be efficient money managers. I talked to you about tracking our spendings, which means being in control of our spendings instead of our spendings being in control of us. I also talked to you about simplifying our lives, thinking twice before we buy, shopping less, praying over family finances, and being a generous giver. In week 22, I talked to you about what the Word of God specifically talks on about money and money management. And obviously in week 21, I mentioned that I wanted you to do that study. What does the Bible say about money? So in week 22, I presented you what I have discovered in my study and what the Word says about efficient money management. I mentioned that we are stewards of God's money. Then I also mentioned that we should store our treasures in heaven instead of on this earth. I also talked to you about the reward for wise money management and serving God instead of money, and much more, obviously. I'm just flying over it. In week 23, I talked to you about spiritual warfare. That was an introductory message that some more messages on spiritual warfare followed. Being aware of constant warfare around us, not believing the lies of the enemy, tearing down strongholds that exalt themselves above the knowledge of God. In week 24, we talked about recognizing the lies of the enemy and analyzing our life and seeing, do I believe the word, which means the Lord, or do I believe the lies of the enemy in my life? That whether it's in regards to our husbands, whether in regards to our lives, whether in regards to our children. In week 25, I talked about the fact that our spiritual battles always always, in one way or another, affect our husbands. Believing God at His word strengthens our husbands, so we can be women of faith and strength and be the pillars that support the fabric of our families. And I also mentioned that faithless words that usually follow our spiritual battles, we just start speaking words of discontentment, words of discouragement, because the enemy comes to tear us down, obviously. So those kind of words obviously also tear our husbands down, which is not good, which is not right. So we don't want to speak those faithless words that crush our husbands' spirits, crush our husbands' faith. In week 26, I talked about righteous and unrighteous motives in speaking life into our husbands. And do you remember how interesting just the whole idea actually was, that you can have unrighteous motives in speaking life into your husband? But that's true. So we speak the words of faith and life into our husbands for them to experience Christ, for them to become everything that Christ wants to become, to grow into their full potential of becoming a man of God, a man after God's own heart. In week 27, we talked about thinking and speaking the truth, speaking about the great things that the Lord has done or is doing in our life, because that is what builds faith. Us acknowledging His work in our lives, in the lives of our husbands, in the lives of our family. We need to speak and acknowledge and be grateful. Speak about those things, because that's what makes us pillars of support. When we speak what the Lord is doing, we need to acknowledge His great works in our lives. Week 28, choosing friends wisely. Proverbs 12:26. I talked to you about that. A wise woman chooses her friends carefully. We become like our friends. And I also shared with you the basic principles of choosing our friends wisely. Week 29. In week 29, I talked to you about the undying friendship between Ruth and Naomi. That's what the whole message was about. And obviously, we broke down that all the logistics, all the beauty, all the practicality of that mentoring relationship between those two women. And I focused specifically on Ruth as a discipler and how she followed all of the virtues that she had, her wisdom, her teachable spirit, her loyalty as a disciple. In week 30, I talked to you about Mary and Elizabeth. And in that particular talk, I specifically focused on Elizabeth as a mentor, as a spiritual mother to Mary. And I encourage you, especially young women, to seek and cling towards older women in your body, so you can be like Mary and glean wisdom and find support in difficult times and have a prayer partner by your side. So that's our 30 weeks. So okay, and I will see you next week. And come here, little baby, come here, come here. And here's a little baby saying bye. See you next week. Bye-bye.